The modern education system was not designed to teach children. And this isn't some tin hat conspiracy theory, this is a known fact. Over 25% of American adults cannot read above kindergarten literacy. This hyperfixation on teacher-guided, that is state-guided, analysis. As we all know, feelings and imagination are subjective, changeable, and prone to manipulation. We wonder why feelings have become the only metric by which society can judge morality. The entire American education system has been deliberately built in such a way that good, beautiful, imaginative, personal writing is not only not a goal, it is actively discouraged.
The literacy crisis isn't real. How would you feel if I said that to you right now, despite the mountain of evidence that says otherwise? Probably a little bit angry, right? But don't worry, I'm not your parents. I'm not here to lie to you, okay? The divorce was your fault. But what if I told you that the literacy crisis was real, that it was caused by mole men releasing brain-altering gas to dull human intellect so they can eventually usurp humanity and conquer the surface? While I would be right about the whole literacy crisis part, why I'm right isn't exactly something large amounts of historical context and research can support. At least that's what they want you to think. You don't know what Even if someone can correctly identify a problem, the logic they use to reach it is arguably even more important. Because if that logic is flawed, incomplete, or just plain wrong, that can lead someone down a path to making the very problems they seek to solve even worse. Foreshadowing is a rhetorical device legally owned by H. Bomber Guy. Hello there, my name is Noah, and I got a handmade spoon for Christmas, which I think is adorable. Normally, I make barely intelligible video essays, but this video is a little bit different, because for one of said video essays, I was looking into this whole literacy crisis thing and stumbled upon a quite popular video called How Modern Schools Make Terrible Writers, parentheses, deliberately, and its accompanying written piece titled Very Carefully Educated to Be Idiots. These are by YouTuber layne, aka The Second Story, who appears to have very quickly learned that waxing hyperbolic about old thing good, new thing bad gets way more views on YouTube than writing advice. However, I'm focusing on these pieces specifically that argue, as near as I can tell, that American literacy has collapsed and contemporary writing is bad because the government has intentionally removed phonics from the American public education system as part of a 100-year plan to deliberately, and I quote,
cut down on a person's ability to think critically and instead conform to, groupthink.
Thank you, Hillary. Very cool. I'm choosing to do this because they commit the very dangerous act of taking a super real crisis in America, but explaining it in all of the wacky, misleading, and harmful ways you can think of. And I'm gonna prove it because the good Lord gave me a camera and made me intimately familiar with many of the events and people Layne is actively lying about. Also, this is not the only video on YouTube I have seen disguising anti-public education, parents' rights core propaganda as literacy crisis fear-mongering for views, because that's what this video is. So stick around if you haven't seen Layne's video, because I am 100% sure there is overlap with other ones. The too long didn't watch of it all is that instead of arguing complex socioeconomic problems, new technological influences, and pedagogic missteps as the source of the American literacy crisis of today, Layne appears to have lifted nearly every major point from her phonics removal conspiracy argument from a non-peer-reviewed, non-academic, historically maligned right-wing conspiracy book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America by Charlotte Iserbyt. I'm just assuming that's how it's pronounced. I know this for sure because it is the very first item listed in her collection of sources she regularly misinterprets and lies about. She very briefly hints towards it in her video by saying things like, I'll concede this data isn't widely known, and according to this book, which is stuffed with primary sources. I made a transcript of the video, by the way, so I don't have to play a million Layne quotes. You're welcome. But never explicitly names or explains what it really is. But don't you worry, by the end of this video, you'll know it better than Layne does. Much like Layne's video, it is a wall of cherry-picked and contextless references designed to build evidence to justify a preconceived conclusion about the problem and not the other way around, like actual research. That conclusion being is that public schools literally should not exist. Don't believe me? Here's a few sections from the book's foreword. Disembodied voice. Hit me with one.
Anyone interested in the truth will be shocked by the way American social engineers have systemically gone about destroying the intellect of millions of American children for the purpose of leading the American people into a socialist world government controlled by behavioral and social scientists.
Fuck yeah, dude. Give me another one.
This is how fascist socialist societies train their children to become servants of their government masters.
Yeah, give me another one.
The only way to restore educational freedom and put education back into the hands of parents where it belongs is to get the federal government and its coercive policies out of education.
This is gonna be fun. We're gonna have fun here today. As you've seen by the completely ridiculous runtime, Layne gets a lot wrong. So please get yourself a little snack and a little drink and get settled in. Oh, and real quick, before we get into this loosely chronological dismantling of a legitimate issue turned into conspiratorial spectacle, I want to be clear that I have no formal education or training in language education at all. I just like learning things and being a nosy bitch. And I feel the need to disclose this because Layne also has no formal education, kind of in general, and doesn't disclose this. So I just want to say we're on even playing fields here. However, I am going out of my way to uneven the playing field because I volunteer in educational spaces and I know people who do know about literacy problems, including the English educators and nice neuroscientists who help me make sure what I am saying in this odyssey of a video is accurate. Thank you to all of them. I'm not putting up their actual pictures and names because they don't want to get doxxed by crazy people on the internet, obviously. Layne does not do something like this. She mostly just mentions how good her grades were from her homeschooled education. Foreshadowing. Also, I kind of apologize in advance if I get a little bitchy, but this video really bothered me a lot as it is wildly disrespectful to educators and artists at best and blindingly inaccurate to the point of malicious intent at worst. And both of these outcomes really twist my nipples and not in the fun, sexy way. And Hilary, if you're watching this, one, hello. And two, what the fuck, man? Say hello to the nice people, Fukumaru.
To give me a mouth, but I can't scream. For this stuffed body is a prison.
For this first one, I feel compelled to mention that Layne starts this video not from the perspective of someone caring about education or children, but someone who thinks that modern writing is personally offensive. She says, "You've probably noticed that writing isn't really what it used to be, opinionating that modern writing has become shallow, homogeneous, aesthetically impoverished, and unmoored from the expressive richness of earlier eras."
Bad prose in modern books takes many forms. The writing itself can be horrendous, but even when it's not, even when the writing isn't actively punching you in the face every other sentence, it all still just kind of reads the same, like the same person wrote it all.
Curse those work emails sprinkled with emojis. Obviously, this is not anything based off of real evidence and just her personal unverifiable opinion. And my opinion is that starting her video with calling modern writing bad sours her intentions because it comes across as someone complaining that they're too lazy to find anything good to read instead of having genuine concern for the state of literacy. It's a bit weird considering she puts creepypastas and no-sleep posts on her recommended reading list, but hey, what do I know? I'm just reading the stuff that she does. Obviously, the era that we live in will always appear to have more dog shit because the eras we look back on have had all of the dog shit filtered out. The old thing, new, good thing, bad. Wait a minute. The old thing, good, new thing, bad sentiment is a lazy argument, but a favorite of so many people. I find so many good things to read. So Layne, if you want Rex, hit me up. But if you actually want to be a little smarty pants about it, linguistic research consistently shows that language change is not deterioration but adaptation, as renowned linguist David Crystal points out.
It has to be accepted that the identity of a language will change, as it always has in the past, even to the extent of fundamentally altering its character. The apparently unpalatable truth can be made less so by pointing to what happens when languages actually do change their character. They do not somehow deteriorate or disappear. Rather, their new character becomes a fresh resource which can be used in all kinds of creative directions.
By the way, this guy is the guy responsible for the Cambridge Encyclopedia of Language. He is like the language guy. He knows his shit. Everybody who writes and uses language today navigates a wider range of registers than writers of earlier eras, from academic writing to corporate email to text messaging and social media, digital short form writing, you fucking name it, all of which reward different rhetorical strategies, and Layne trying to lump everything together is reductive and unhelpful outside of the explicit intention to fearmonger about aesthetic moralization. I have to mention though that the closest thing that she gives to evidence is actually towards the end of the video, where she compares the prose of Josephine Johnson's novel Now in November, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1935, with Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, which won the Booker Prize in 2023. I'm putting excerpts from both of them on screen now. Feel free to pause and read them at your own pace, but they are obviously quite different. One is much more flowery and feels very stylistically older, and one is significantly more tight, more claustrophobic and short in a way that feels a bit more modern, if you will. She then goes on to say that an ad from a Sears catalog in 1945 has better flow than 2023's Booker Prize winner because modern writers are no longer being taught how to read in a way that will, among many other things, allow them to detect and also produce a beautiful rhythm in their prose. Harsh words, and at first glance, one does feel that, there's a bit more writerly nature in Josephine Johnson's, but what if I told you two little itty-bitty facts that Layne conveniently forgets to mention about this comparison? The first thing is that Prophet Song is a fucking dystopian novel. The short claustrophobic prose is intentional because it is a stylistic choice to fit the tone of the novel, which Layne completely ignores in favor of her own subjective opinion towards a book written for an entirely different genre and an entirely different style, 100 years different. Pretty funny how she doesn't really seem to have a problem with putting creepypasta in her recommended list, but God forbid an Irish guy write a dystopian novel. Oh no, you didn't hear me incorrectly, because that's point number two, in that Paul Lynch is Irish and the Booker Prize is for non-American UK books. He wasn't educated in the United States at all, which is where the entirety of her argument is going to be based on. Why did she not pick another American novel to compare, or even any other American Book Award? I don't know. Your guess is truly as good as mine. She does try to justify this choice in what appears to be an addendum in the article with her sources, but I would bet literally anything that she slapped that on there after it was out because she realized that this dude and the book weren't actually from the land of the free but illiterate until after her video and article were already up. These two things, the subjective moralization and careless presentation of facts, remain a constant throughout the entire video, which is why I am leading with this, because Layne offers no empirical measure of what constitutes good writing because her standard is simply aesthetic, nostalgic, and selective. God damn, I'm already getting bitchy. Holy fuck, this shit gets me so heated, dude. Section 2. Okay, quick thing number 2 I just want to blast through real quick is that Layne asserting that technological writing tools such as AI writing assistants to grammar to spell check became popular because people already lacked writing skills, suggesting that
This over-reliance on technology actually indicates that some kind of deficit already existed, which created a need for these artificial aids. That's something I want to make very clear. AI writing is absolutely killing aspiring writers' ability to put together stories and prose on their own. But there's a reason people immediately found AI assistants so tempting and appealing. The problem with writing already existed. AI just offered an artificial solution.
I'm mentioning this because it's the first example of another trick in Layne's conspiratorial book, which is fundamentally misunderstanding and misrepresenting cultural and technological dynamics that she's trying to critique in the way that strengthens her narrative. Fun. On this AI shit. I hate AI. It is universally bad and I want it to go away forever. But this isn't about whether AI is good or bad, even though it is super mega ultra bad. This is about Layne reversing the dynamic of how technology arises. Throughout the history of literary technologies, people have adopted tools not because they were incapable of writing, but because they could already write, and these tools made writing more consistent, accessible, and efficient. And Layne is asserting that we invented AI because we can't write is the equivalent of saying we invented the calculator because we couldn't do math. Examples. Things like spell check did not come to exist because people could not spell. It came to be because spell checking manually was time consuming and could provide real-time correction and knowledge to the user. Word processors did not replace handwriting because humans lost the ability to write by hand. They replaced handwriting because editing became easier, writing became faster, and storage became significantly more convenient. Things like predictive text did not emerge because people lost language skills, but because mobile input constraints made predictive assistance practical. I fucking hate texting, dude. I would kill for just something else. I would also be remiss not to mention incredibly important accessibility advantages that exist, which allow people with various forms of disabilities to engage in writing with these technologies. Layne never ever addresses anything like this in her entire video. Spoilers. To be clear, AI absolutely will affect writing in the long term because it makes our brains even worse just kind of standing next to it. But the idea that we invented it and other technologies because we are bad at writing is pants on head ridiculous. Also, because I'm on a roll here, in the case of AI specifically, Layne fails to consider broader explanations that might lead to people making use of such tools, even though we broadly dislike them, such as US writing instruction in general being very uneven and often underfunded, leaving disadvantaged people looking for shortcuts because students receive far fewer hours of writing instruction than they do reading or math, after all. School systems that prioritize a certain kind of result instead of learning how to write for the joy of writing. Digital distraction as a whole, just kind of melting our brains into mush, which is another thing that she never mentions, which I find to be fucking crazy. There's so much you could say about this that Layne does not. The rising popularity of AI tools reflect the pressures of efficiency and productivity culture in digital workplaces and schooling environments, and Layne's framing turns a technological trend she could totally tie to shitty tech billionaires into a moral narrative about how kids are being made dumb on purpose to use AI. Layne hyperbolically stirring anxieties by saying, there's a reason people go straight to ChatGPT when they want to write a novel or a poem or a sweet text to the girlfriend without examining the structural conditions behind why some people might be inclined to use it, and ignoring the wave of resistance this technology has from the masses is unhelpful as it is telling. And again, to be crystal clear, all this AI shit is bad and stinky. I'm just saying Layne isn't actually looking at the underlying problems for why this is happening. She is trying to blame it on mass conspiracy theories instead, and make me have to go through the effort of improving her argument. The absolute audacity. Anyways, enough of this baby shit. It's time we get to big boy hours. I don't know why I remembered this being better. Ugh. One of the first big assertions that we get is that contemporary writing is stinky poo-poo because Americans can no longer read at adequate levels. Layne states that most writers today did not learn using phonics. Readers taught this way have less comprehension. Spoilers, she presents no meaningful proof of this outside of some personal anecdotes. Spoilers too, Electric Boogaloo, there absolutely is a connection between reading and writing abilities, but her narrow framing sabotages her own argument. Layne asserts that failures in writing and broader cognitive and cultural decline are downstream consequences of intentionally malicious, inadequate decoding instruction, particularly the alleged abandonment of phonics.
There is a startling amount of scholarship out there to support the claims made by some that the removal of phonics in public state-run schools actually intended to decrease or at least limit literacy.
This must be one of God's bad jokes.
Decoding is a part of reading comprehension where you know how to accurately recognize a word, and phonics is teaching explicit letter-to-sound correspondences, as per this handy image. I'm defining these to you right now because Layne broadly doesn't, nor does she explain how these instructional components are meant to operate developmentally, but don't worry, gorgeous. I got you. This is important to mention because the view of reading that Layne presents is treated as functionally synonymous with decoding and phonics, and literally decline is explained specifically as educators maliciously removing phonics and replacing it with other fun things we'll get to later, which are used for, obviously, social engineering. Quote,
according to this book, which is stuffed with primary sources, the move away from phonics was intended to cut down on a person's ability to think critically and instead conform to, groupthink.
Nice throwback to the beginning there, me. Good job. If you were thinking, I wonder if that framing is in the conspiracy book, pat yourself on the back because you'd be correct, big man. In The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, which I shall be henceforth referring to as the DDD, presents American education reform as part of a, quote, consistent, deliberate 100-year plan to dumb down the populace. It's worth mentioning that the author, Charlotte Iserbyt, does not only focus on phonics removal, because there's a lot of crazy shit in here, which we will be getting to, such as the indoctrination of students in communism and planning to sneak in socialized medicine into the country through the education system. However, her work supplies the conspiratorial framework which Layne narrows and modernizes beat for beat. This oversimplification of everything into one neat framework is how Layne is able to treat decoding and phonics instruction as both the foundation of literacy and the primary safeguard against ideological manipulation throughout her entire video.
When the education system in America was established and formed, it was done in an effort to socially condition children. The establishers and formers said so themselves on numerous occasions. To them, this was important. Children needed to be taught what to think. They needed to have their opinions formed very carefully. This is explicitly stated in many sources. But when they were doing this establishing and forming, one of the first things they did was throw out memorizing the alphabet and learning phonics.
Anyways, back to the reading and writing thing. Regardless of Layne's lack of evidence, this was something I was actually pretty interested to learn about because, on its face, the relationship between reading and writing totally does make sense. Reading comprehension, vocabulary knowledge, exposure to high quality text are all strong predictors of writing ability, but like the silly goose that she is, Layne collapses the complex relationship into a binary opposition between actual real literacy, framed almost entirely as phonics-based decoding, and a vague generalized condition of illiteracy. She mentions throughout her video that Americans have lost the ability to read extended prose, comprehend complex syntax, decode unfamiliar words, sustain attention, interpret figurative language. However, contemporary literacy research does not define reading as a single skill, nor does it solely equate weakness in phonics with illiteracy. Reading is actually pretty complicated to anyone thinking about it for more seconds. So here, let me give you a nice little primer. Oh, fuck. Hello there. This is the part where I teach you about reading because Layne does not, due to the fact that her video would fall apart completely if she actually did. You see, what reading actually is a constellation of interacting skills, including word recognition, linguistic comprehension, vocabulary knowledge, background knowledge, textual reasoning, self-regulation. Boy, it's almost like it's really complicated. However, a simple, well-accepted formula of reading comprehension is seen as this: decoding and language comprehension equals reading comprehension. Remember that decoding is the ability to translate written text into spoken words, and then language comprehension is the ability to understand spoken language, including vocabulary, sentence structure, and discourse. Not that kind. To quote from The Simple View of Reading, which, by the way, is an incredibly important, well-regarded piece of research on what goes into reading, arguing for phonics and decoding that Layne should reference to support her arguments, but does not for some reason. The Simple View does not reduce reading to decoding, but asserts that reading necessarily involves the full set of linguistic skills, such as parsing, bridging, and discourse building. Decoding in the absence of these skills is not reading. At the same time, the Simple View holds that decoding is also of central importance for reading, for without it, linguistic comprehension is of no use. Thus, a second central claim of the Simple View is that both decoding and linguistic comprehension are necessary for reading success, neither being sufficient by itself. Thank you, Goen Tunmer. Very cool. Decoding and phonics are both incredibly important, but if you hear anybody say that it is some kind of magic bullet to our literacy problems without mentioning anything about immense inequity issues, close the goddamn tab, brother. The National Reading Report from 2000, which is one of the major things that kickstarted a re-emphasis on phonics, which we will talk about later, says this explicitly in multiple places, such as, teachers must understand that systematic phonics instruction is only one component, albeit a necessary component, of a total reading program. Systematic phonics instruction should be integrated with other reading instruction for phonemic awareness, fluency, and comprehension strategies to create a complete reading program. Anyways, the reading rope is a well-accepted visual representation of inner working skills needed to be good at reading. Very cool. If you want to be a big smarty pants and go even further, newer research takes all the good bits from the rope and expands upon them with skills to recognize the importance of being actively involved in the reading process, such as contextual influence and strategic processing, which are poggers. The last thing here is that Layne further collapses the categories of functional literacy, which is the ability to read everyday texts in common places, and disciplinary literacy, such as reading classical novels or dense legal and philosophical prose, into one neat category of literacy. And the distinction is important because both are constantly measured and assessed in different ways by different tests. Throughout her video, she constantly, either by pure ignorance or untethered maliciousness, misuses specific data and testing for one or the other to make blanket claims on illiteracy, further hiding nuance from you, the poor viewer, in exchange for rhetorical satisfaction. But we'll get more to that later. Okay, that's it for now until I come back again to talk about weird shit Layne says goodbye. Thank you, Interlude Me. Very cool. Our point here is that reading is pretty fucking complicated, and so is writing, and thusly difficulties in writing cannot solely be attributed to failures in early decoding instruction, nor do weaknesses in one component of reading imply generalized illiteracy, Layne suggests. If she had done anything besides focus on just phonics, she would have something here, but Hilary Layne's points are continually undermined by Hilary Layne. An extremely egregious absence I cannot emphasize enough is how she laments that diminished attention spans and reading stamina are the sole result of educational failure, yet does not ever seem to mention something so incredibly obvious like digital media environments profoundly affecting reading habits and sustained concentration across all education. This is something you could very easily connect back to the billionaire conspiracy part of our argument and say some shit like Steve Jobs was trying to use the iPhone to turn kids vegan and gay or whatever. Like, again, Hilary, don't make me steel man your video like this. It's embarrassing. But if you want an actually good video that talks more about this video by Jared Henderson, as well as a bunch of the videos that he's done, talks about various other reasons for why this is a thing that's actually useful to listen to. So go watch those. These issues are cultural and technological in nature, not evidence of a hidden pedagogical psyop to make, to quote the book, curriculum changes favorable to the indoctrination of students in communism. God, we're having fun. We're having fun, right, Fukumaru?
You've been making me listen to white woman conspiracy theories for 4 hours. Do you think I'm having fun?
So true, Queen. Go off. Okie dokie, now we're getting into the real juicy bitch. Sorry for all that like front-loading information shit, but I had to do that on reading and decoding because it makes everything way easier now. We have now established that Layne asserts that the decline in literacy stems from a coordinated, near total abandonment of phonics. And to add to that, she says that whole language methods, which are a largely debunked teaching method that differs from phonics-based learning, which focuses on engaging with words as whole units and making visual associations as per this handy image, more on this later, were implemented to replace it. Obviously in part of the previously mentioned grand conspiracies on behalf of, quote,
billionaire industrialists and also the actual government, if you'll pardon my tin hat, deliberately undermined the education system of America over 100 years ago.
Hey, wait a minute. Doesn't that wording sound kind of familiar? Oh, wow, it's the book again. It's almost like I planned that or something. Spooky. For those of you who have seen the video or are watching along, I know around now she starts throwing around spooky words such as generative themes and critical literacy, but we'll get to those in more appropriate sections. And I know I keep saying that, I'm sorry, but there's so much. There's so much. She's so wrong. I'm sorry this is so long, but she's so wrong. Anyways, back at it. This simplistic narrative of billionaires replace phonics in a government psyop misrepresents both the history and the substance of reading instruction in the United States. While the reading wars, which is a dramatic name given to the educational debates around literacy in the late 20th century, did pit phonics and whole language proponents against one another, the idea that phonics vanished is objectively, historically inaccurate. Almost no districts ever implemented pure whole language methods because many favored balanced literacy, a hybrid mode of teaching which attempted to combine phonics with whole language-based approaches, which became the dominant form in the 1990s broadly. Also, Layne's minuscule account of the reading wars obscures a very crucial point in that disagreements over reading instruction were never simply about whether children should learn phonics at all, but how phonics should be integrated into broader literacy instruction. While research consistently shows that phonics totes improves decoding accuracy and early fluency, educators have long recognized that decoding alone cannot account for a full range of reading outcomes observed in the classroom, as we saw when I explained reading. As a result, instructional debates have focused on implementation quality, instructional time, and resource allocation, not eliminating phonics altogether. And I want to be clear, as I said before, the whole language thing is pretty much discredited and literally doesn't work. Like even Wikipedia says this in the first sentence on its page. And critics of it have argued pretty wildly that even balanced literacy often included insufficient phonics instruction. See, Layne is right about the whole language thing not being good and phonics being lacking in certain time periods, in certain areas, but I smell the mole, man. As examples of whole language and its instruction, she very briefly shows old teacher's guides she dismisses as
bizarre, esoteric, yet highly specific occult self-help manuals. It talks about the social aspect of language and other similarly Orwellian hot words instead of actually learning how to figure out what the words on the page say.
That's her context, by the way. I'm not kidding. That's literally it. She also laments that instructors are replacing decoding with emotional analysis, and that children are being taught that the most important thing about reading is learning the correct way to interpret a text. Oh, I smell a book quote.
It is fast forward into the world of global workforce training, where the teacher will be in front of the classroom chanting, not instructing. Your children will be expected to perform like rats or pigeons, not learn academic content.
Thank you, kind quote reader, who also has a good video on Layne. Please go watch it, dear viewer. Thank you. Hi. Also, subscribe, I guess. As much as I would love a good scholastic ritualistic chanting session instead of crying over my timetables in class, in reality, the central assumption behind whole language is that children would infer phonics naturally through immersion in reading things they found interesting and in an attempt to provide an alternative, less rigid form of learning. It was meant to be, according to a book documenting the rise and fall of whole language, a response to the top-down alienating practices of the workbook era, and Layne's dramatization of it being used for George Orwell 1987 Animal Crossing levels of control is essentially the opposite of its actual effects and intention, which was to explicitly loosen the strict controlling phonics curricula of the time. And straight up, yo, it failed. However, it was a pedagogical miscalculation from many people trying many different things just as they always have. Not evidence of a covert program to suppress literacy, even though it is significantly more fun to LARP a homeschooled freedom fighter than accept the complications of the Sisyphusian task of perfecting education. To quote an actually good book on the topic of education reform, Tinkering Towards Utopia, a century of public schooling reform, policies are often layered on top of existing practices rather than replacing them, producing hybrids that satisfy neither reformers nor practitioners. To attribute school failure to malicious intent is to misunderstand how institutions actually operate. Most reform outcomes are unintended. The ease and simplicity in which Layne asserts a flawless, correct way to engage with the very concept of teaching someone to comprehend squiggles with their eyeballs is naive and dangerous, and only useful to someone looking to make people scared instead of actually offering insight for solutions. The complete collapse of nuance towards education in one of the largest countries with huge educational disparities on Earth is a major linchpin in her argument, which allows her to neatly blame problems on one single issue while ignoring basically anything she wants, such as extensive research documenting that children's social class being one of, if not the biggest predictor of educational success, since she likes to say,
We definitely need to avoid meaningless excuses like privilege and elitism. Oppression and elitism is not why I couldn't read in the second grade. Privilege is not why I graduated from high school 10 years later with a 4.0 GPA.
Thank you, Hilary. Very cool. Also, she tries to weasel around the sizable resurgence of phonics by saying, although you do see phonics implemented a little more these days, but never exclusively and never without the added damaging hindrances of whole language, with again, no sources to prove that, and not at all mentioning that the last 2+ decades have witnessed a clear and well-documented resurgence of structured phonics education in United States reading instruction by several converging forces. The National Reading Panel report identified systematic phonics as a critical component of early reading education. There has been a wave of state-level legislation mandating explicit evidence-based phonic curricula, and the recent 2020s, the science of reading movement, often led by journalists, teachers, and general advocates, have responded to the uneven outcomes associated with balanced literacy approaches, directly contradicting Layne's claim that phonics remains marginalized or deliberately suppressed. Boom. By attributing contemporary literary challenges entirely to the alleged abandonment of phonics and the dominance of an occult and Orwellian version of whole language, Layne offers a very simplistic but emotionally satisfying explanation which intentionally diverts attention away from structural factors that literacy researchers and educators repeatedly identified that Layne can't be fucked to mention at all. Inequitable access to books and print-rich environments, childhood poverty and food insecurity, chronic absenteeism, uneven teacher preparation, reduced instructional time for literacy. You get the freaking idea, dog. Pardon my language here, but Layne's lazy dog shit narrative implies a moral failure around how education knowingly and intentionally sabotaged reading instruction, which is so unbelievably disrespectful to the people working in our least appreciated and most important profession while they try to navigate bureaucratic hellscapes. And that just, oh my God, that bothers me. These people are doing their best to keep up with new researchers and all sorts of shenanigans to do their best by their fucking kids. Obviously, no teachers are perfect, but the broad dismissal of American teachers and education, shitty. It's shitty, but this is meant to be a shitty rhetorical move because it's designed to trick people who aren't as autistically nosy as I am to prepare the ground for her later conspiratorial claims that she offers as supporting evidence. But every single chunk of historical scholarship shows that reading instruction from the 1980s through the 2000s was shaped by genuine pedagogical disagreement, political pressure, institutional inertia, and funding constraints, not by a magical, unified program of social engineering. Hello, I return, not to teach you about reading again, but to mention one of the super weird out-of-pocket lines Layne drops because I think it shows some important texture about how she thinks. During one of the times, she's lambasting public schools in regards to the quality of their teaching, because this is an anti-public education video at its core. She drops this incredibly weird jab at sex education.
In the 2 years I was in public school, all we did was watch movies, learn about drugs, and glue small pieces of paper to larger pieces of paper. In 4th grade, they also learned how to put condoms on bananas. I'm not sure why 4th graders would need to know how to use condoms, but that's a subject for another day.
Now, this set off alarm bells in my noodle for a couple of reasons. Firstly, in terms of 4th graders, every single sex education guideline recommendation I could find from both specific schools and on a national level outline discussion around puberty, germs, understanding healthy relationships, foundational shit like that is appropriate for that age. Teaching kids about the technical aspects of safe sex, the whole condom on banana type beat, is on every single guideline reserved for kids who are at least in the 6th grade. Now, obviously, I can't prove that Layne is lying about this. There could be some crazy teachers doing stuff. There could be weird guidelines that happen here and there at various schools. I don't know. But the fact that she finds a way of making the same jab a second time later on and openly admits to not wanting sex education in public schools at all via a comment she made down below rang my alarm bells. However, it gets weirder. As Layne said, this happened to her in the 4th grade in the video, but I found more context to what she's talking about in a response from Layne below a comment from another person also pointing out how weird it is for her to say shit like the banana line. She clarifies in said comment that she walked past a classroom with the door open and witnessed this demonstration as she was going to the bathroom. That is a little sussy. She also claims that the teacher got in trouble later for doing that. Not entirely sure how she would know that at all. But what makes this whole thing stand out, in my opinion, is the timeline. Layne said that she was in public school for 2 whole years, in which she was sure to mention they did nothing of note. She echoes this chronology later by saying, "I still sometimes feel the effects of 2 years of whole language," which is just like, okay, Lieutenant Dan, you weren't in Vietnam. Let's calm down here. She says her father taught her how to read, because she couldn't apparently, with phonics books in the 2nd grade, sometime shortly after which he pulled her out of public school. Therefore, from my deduction, Layne's timeline indicates she was in public school presumably in the 1st and 2nd grade, because that's where one starts unless you had kindergarten. Or to be charitable, she could have even been in school for some of 3rd grade, assuming that daddy yoinked her out a little later on. Thusly, unless I am missing some key piece of information, there is no way she could be in public school in the 4th grade based off of the information she has provided. But that's just a theory. a game theory. Again, I can't actually prove any of this because I can't look into Layne's past, but because she's basically made up everything else in this video with no proof and actively hates public education with the sole solution to be homeschooling your kids, spoilers, I have a strong reason to believe that she's literally just making this up to pander to libertarian parents' rights types folks who are destined to become grandparents at 35. Okay, that's it for now. Back to the video. I'll see you guys later. Wee! How we doing? We hanging in there? You still got a snack? You need a drink refill? Well, then you better fucking do that because we are not far enough. Big shout outs to my teacher friends for helping me with those last couple sections, minus the condom banana one. But now it's time for Big Papa to step up to the plate. The next and one of the most important things that we need to talk about is the concept of critical literacy and how Layne misrepresents it, because it is the keystone misunderstanding in her argument that she got from you know where.
Critical literacy aims to teach not literacy, but rather a kind of social awareness, which was using teaching reading as a delivery method of sorts, as if reading was just the syringe and this right kind of social awareness was the real thing they wanted the child to receive.
Very dramatic. It's social engineering disguised as reading methods. Really love the syringe metaphor. She unfortunately continues.
The concept of critical literacy then infected the education world. Within 2 decades, it had been adopted by the US government as an aspect of ESL programs. By the 90s, it had quickly but completely become the new literacy.
Dun, dun, dun. She's lying. She frames critical literacy as a politicized governmental indoctrination program that displaced foundational reading instruction in American schools. Oh, and obviously, of course, it was crafted by leftist pedagogues Paulo Freire, I am losing my mind, Paulo Freire and Ira Shore, and allegedly imposed on all education. Ignoring the mole men for a second here, the actual concept of critical literacy very simply involves the analysis and critique of the relationships among language, power, and social practice. To quote an actual academic article on its purpose and not Layne's fun little book, educational work in the field of critical literacy provides a key opportunity for the debating, unpacking, and learning about this family of questions. How does language, text, discourse, and information make a difference? For whom? In what material, social, and consequential ways? In whose interests? According to what patterns, rules, and in what institutional and cultural sites. I can't speak for Layne, but uncritically taking in information with no examining of the relations between that information and the world you live in is something I think we can all agree on is a bad thing. Critical literacy never did and never was intended to replace anything, let alone phonics or decoding, because Layne never bothers to mention a little itty bitty important bit of information. Critical literacy is for adult learners. Sorry kiddos, you gotta grow up to get brainwashed. Sucks for you. The dudes behind critical literacy worked to provide extra layering to education because they knew, to quote big man Paulo Freire himself, there is no such thing as a neutral education process. This should be something that Layne agreed with based on her vibrant rhetoric. However, it's clear that this book has distorted Layne's interpretation of what critical literacy actually is. She talks about how initially, when she first heard the term, she said, "I was foolish enough to assume that it meant literacy that involved the ability to think critically and analyze the meaning of the text by one's own power." To be completely honest, I'm not entirely sure what that means. She never really expands on it. But then after she had this revelation given to her, she goes on to define it as something created by corrupt forces for the machinations that she wishes were real. Also, here's a book quote.
In the 1970s, this writer, Charlotte Iserbyt, and many others waged the war against values clarification, which was later renamed critical thinking, which, regardless of the label, and there are bound to be many more labels on the horizon, is nothing but pure, unadulterated destruction of absolute values of which right and wrong upon which stable and free societies depend.
Important to know that whenever you see critical thinking in the DDD, substitute critical literacy, and that is Layne's interpretation entirely. Critical thinking and value clarification are frequently attacked for treating interpretive and reflective pedagogy as mechanisms for reshaping beliefs, emotions, and loyalties rather than teaching skills. Layne yoinks this framework exactly and substitutes critical thinking for critical literacy while keeping the underlying accusation, which is that the act of teaching interpretation itself is a form of ideological conditioning. Layne directly echoes the absolutism of methodology in quotes like this.
Before they were even taught their ABCs, they were taught that their own minds were not to be trusted to understand words on a page. And we wonder why feelings have become the only metric by which society can judge morality. Feelings are the only thing people were ever taught was legitimate or valid.
This is some full-blown Ben Shapiro ass facts don't care about your feelings type shit. Like, wake me up when you got facts that are actually right, please. Every single thing that Layne talks about here is theoretically, historically, and just factually wrong. But anyways, let's talk about old people. Paulo Freire, an educator and philosopher most known for being dripped the fuck out, did not emerge in, from, or for the American public education system. Layne gives absolutely zero context on Freire in her video or article whatsoever, only name-dropping him conspiratorially and leaving the viewer to assume whatever they want because she knows the people that she panders to won't give her sources the slightest bit of scrutiny. She doesn't give context to who he is because if people actually knew that her grand architect of critical literacy designed to take over American education developed his work for adult literacy campaigns amongst impoverished rural Brazilian peasants living under authoritarian political conditions, because Freire worked and lived in Brazil, not America, Layne's narrative wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense. Freire's project was not to replace literacy instruction in the United States, but to enable literacy where none existed in South America, aiming to explicitly link reading instruction to the lived realities of people whose political agencies has been systematically oppressed. Is Paulo Freire in the book? Oh boy, I don't know. Could he be in the big old section titled Paulo Freire's Influence on World Education? I don't know. To quote the big man himself, reading the world always precedes reading the word, and reading the word implies continually reading the world. Bars. Freire's central concept, this one refers to the development of critical consciousness through treating learning as a dialogue with instructors. This is the exact opposite of indoctrination because it is specifically an invitation for learners to interrogate their world with active engagement rather than to passively absorb information. Two principles of Freire's pedagogy are completely ignored on Layne's account. The first is that literacy is foundational to Freire. He treated reading and writing as prerequisites for political participation and developing agencies within the systems you live under, not operational skills to be bypassed. I don't think a single person can disagree with this. It is how we engage in basically all of the world. And the second thing that he thought is that dialogue should broadly be horizontal, is that teachers and learners should engage collaboratively rather than through top-down transmission, which is what Layne seems to want since she keeps advocating for the teaching of a single morally correct way to do things. I am actively deteriorating. Freire did not propose that elementary school children interpret text ideologically before learning to read. That does not make any fucking sense. His work was intended for adult learners who had been denied literacy altogether, not for restructuring American early reading instruction, which is what Layne is heavily implying with giving zero context as to his nature. Trying to label Freire and his work as responsible in literally any way for the literacy crisis is to fundamentally misunderstand both the context and purpose of his work, and shows that Layne did absolutely zero research whatsoever on Frere outside of the tiny section that was in her stupid fucking book. Mallman. Old guy number 2, let's go. Ira Shore, an American educator who sometimes collaborated with Frere that Layne also thinks is a mastermind, adapted some of the ideas of critical literacy that we spoke about for college-level adult and ESL education, not elementary school baby reading instruction to turn your kids gay. His concept of generative themes, told you we'd get to these, refers to socially meaningful topics that anchor reading and writing tasks in learners' lived experiences. To quote Shore, they add critical discussion about things they already know and talk about uncritically every day. These sociological inquiries permit them to discover a small number of keywords from daily life called generative words, which will be used for both problematizing experience and for literacy teaching. That generative words like brick, rice, slum, or wealth suggest social themes around which consciousness can then be raised. According to Hilary, however,
what does this mean for writing? First of all, this means that writers are no longer writing what they think and what they perceive and what they intuit and even what they feel. Sure, they're writing what they're supposed to, and they're paying very close attention to generative themes and all those generative words like wealth and slums and, just as a reader, as trained by this system, has to consult some other source to tell them what the text they just read was saying, a writer trained in this way has to consult some other authority to make sure they're thinking and perceiving and intuiting and feeling the right things the right way. That is, that they are writing the right way.
Broadly speaking, every single person will learn better when they're learning in a way that is relatable in some way to their life. And I think that it is an extremely selfish and elitist way of viewing the world if you think everybody should have to engage with it the same way. It's almost like Layne has some singular, correct view of life that she deems mandatory or whatever, especially considering she wants to, quote, avoid meaningless excuses like privilege and elitism. Now who's doing the fun little Orwellian hot words? To put it another way, generative themes and critical literacy are content selection strategies to allow teachers to meet students where they are and raise them up, not decoding methods meant to replace phonics, nor were they ever designed for beginning readers. Again, this exactly mirrors the DDD's earlier suspicion towards the act of interpretation itself, and again, this meaning making is framed as manipulation rather than a normal component of interpretive literacy ability once basic skills are established. Like, what's the point of knowing how to read if you can't connect what you read to your life and everything around it? Layne saying within 2 decades, critical literacy became the new literacy is not even close to being verifiable at all, and that's why she doesn't even attempt to try. You can look at literally any iteration of K through 12 core standards and see over time that foundational literacy instruction in the United States has endlessly continued to emphasize phonological awareness, fluency, phonics, vocabulary, and comprehension. The only inclusion of critical literacy in this list is in Layne's mind. However, by doing this, Layne presents critical literacy as a system-wide ideological takeover, which allows her to make this perfect villain that can explain every perceived failure. Layne's broader narrative relies on the idea of intentional sabotage, because without the claim, the interpretation, replaced literacy, the conspiracy that she has made completely collapses into a far more mundane reality, which is contested pedagogy, uneven implementation, socioeconomic issues, and chronic underfunding. But that's not very fun, so instead, Layne would just fudge some data Yippee! Holy fuck, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Oh. Okay, let's take a little break from educational theory now to look at some data, everyone's favorite thing. Next up, Layne cites the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, a big ol' assessment designed to see how peeps are doing education-wise. She presents these results as evidence that Americans have resulted. Her interpretation of recent data is, and I quote,
over 25% of American adults cannot read above kindergarten literacy, and that number is growing.
If you're thinking, wow, kindergarten literacy is a pretty vague metric for a big ol' important assessment to be using, congrats, you're right again. Realistically, there isn't a reason for Layne to be pointing this out with her current argumentation because the PIAAC does not assess kindergarten level reading, phonics knowledge, or basic decoding ability, which are how Layne has chosen to frame reading. Rather, according to the National Center for Education Statistics and the OECD, the PIAAC, God, that's a lot of letters, evaluates adults' capacity to use and find written information in modern social and workplace contexts. Where phonics, Layne? Where phonics? They have their own definition of literacy that they are testing for, which reads, literacy is accessing, understanding, evaluating, and reflecting on written tests in order to achieve one's goals and develop one's knowledge and potential and participate in society. Each of those words have their nice little definitions on the NCES website for clarity. Very cool. But Layne says something rather curious in response to that definition.
This is still pretty jargon heavy, but I think we can manage. I do appreciate that they're at least extremely clear about what they mean by all these individual words. Personally, I greatly dislike this odd word accessing here. To my mind, one's ability to access written text is reading. They mean reading.
No, Layne, they don't mean reading. That's why they don't call it reading. God, the ego on this woman, good Lord. Anyways, Layne repeatedly equates level 1 PIAAC performance with kindergarten literacy, and this term isn't used anywhere in the actual assessment. She does the same thing with other levels too. Like on level 2, she says, personally, I would call this 3rd or 4th grade literacy, and like, that's nice, but the researchers who built this don't. Anyways, according to the OECD's official proficiency descriptors, adults at level 1 can understand short texts and organize lists when information is clearly indicated, find specific information, and identify relevant links. These people typically struggle not with reading words or sentences, but with integrating information, handling unfamiliar formats, or navigating complex digital texts. Also, level 1 is not the lowest category. NCES distinguishes between level 1 and below level 1, the latter representing adults with the most severe difficulties. In 2019, it was reported that approximately 4.1% of US adults scored below level 1, meaning they were unable to successfully determine the meaning of sentences, read relatively short texts to locate a single piece of information, and complete simple forms. These people could reasonably be described as functionally illiterate. This figure is far smaller than Layne's inference and does not support the assertion that a quarter of Americans cannot read even at a basic level. Armed with our appropriate context, let's gander at the numbers for realsies here, why don't we? Because the most recent PIAAC results show that 28% of adults scored at or below level 1 literacy in 2023. This represents an increase in 19% from 2017, and that ain't good. However, it's worth mentioning that the US remains close to the OECD average. Now, this data is definitely serious and concerning, but they do not indicate widespread inability to read in its entirety. They show growing difficulty with higher order functional and digital literary tasks in a society that increasingly demands them. This is still bad. I want to be clear. I'm just giving you what the assessment actually says and not Layne's fantasized version to make you scared. Layne crushes the distinction between below level 1 and level 1 into a single kindergarten literacy, which transforms a nuanced assessment into a sensational narrative of collapse with a term so unscientific it should give you alarm bells as soon as you heard it. I mean, realistically, they should already be going off anyways, but, you know, better late than never, I guess. Also, I ain't seeing shit about how critical literacy, political interpretation, ideological analysis, values clarification, Freirean or critical pedagogy are listed anywhere as issues for why these problems exist. The PIAAC does reveal, however, say it with me, class, structural inequalities that Layne's account entirely ignores. Yes, very, very nice. Hey, spit out that fucking gum. It is exceptionally important to mention that literacy declines are not evenly distributed. They are very concentrated among non-white adults, non-native born peoples, and unemployed / out of labor folks. That means they're not looking for work due to retirement, caregiving, disability.
We definitely need to avoid meaningless excuses like privilege and elitism.
Or schooling. I do want to say that across all age groups in this data, it is universally down, which is not good. But these patterns point to persistent socioeconomic and digital access inequalities, not socialist, fascist, pedagogical takeovers or the replacement of literacy with ideology. However, the fascists did get in power recently, so like, I guess I'll give Layne half a point for that. All of this data does document a real literacy problem, but it is not the one that Layne describes. It does not show a return to kindergarten level literacy. It does not demonstrate the replacement of literacy with ideology. It does not implicate Freire or Shore or critical literacy as any factor at all. It shows that modern life has become more text-heavy, digital, and bureaucratic, and a substantial minority of adults are struggling to keep pace, especially those who are already disadvantaged by inequality. Surprise. Layne is right, the data is troubling. Layne is wrong about what it measures, what it means, and what the causes are. And then she does it again immediately right after with another study. The next thing I found quite strange is that Hilary goes on this strange diatribe in the middle of her main spiel on critical thinking about how no one has their own opinion on things anymore, how everybody is just regurgitating what someone else said, from opinions on art to politics, and it's just a really sad show of attempted bootstrap pulling. No one thinks twice about it because they were raised from the crib to let others tell them how to analyze text. She really cranks up the drama with some wild examples here.
Ask someone what they thought of the movie they just watched, and they'll be like, well, Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 62% fresh, so... Okay, yes, but what did you think of the movie you just watched? Ask a person what they thought of the book they just read, and they'll tell you what Twitter user 719 said. Ask a person who they think they should vote for, and they'll start quoting the army of influencers who tell them what to think, probably using the same limited vocabulary of generative words. Now you ask your work friend if that book they're reading is any good, and they fire up ChatGPT to get an answer. Now we're not even relying on other humans to tell us what to think, but machines.
First off, Twitter users don't read books because they're too busy generating child porn. Thank you very much. Secondly, there could be a nuanced take here about the influences of arts discussion and the purpose of seeking insight on quality from said discussions. Shameless plug on my previous video, but that won't be found here because it's people like Layne who work to flatten and moralize art and media into singular definitions of value that lead to this endless regurgitation that she is complaining about. See any discussion on a video game from certain kinds of people. There's this fascinating dissonance that she doesn't realize her entire body of work is dedicated to demonizing the very idea of interpretation, especially this video. She is building the echo chamber that she is complaining about. Layne, the call is coming from inside the house. The funniest part to me, though, is after that, when she says this.
We wonder why feelings have become the only metric by which society can judge morality. Feelings are the only thing people were ever taught was legitimate or valid, which is why if you hurt someone's feelings, that is, to people trained in this way, infinitely worse than saying something that is factually inaccurate. No one thinks anymore.
This is literally some Ben Shapiro-ass facts don't care about your feelings type shit by someone who very clearly wants to participate in complex discussions around art, but whose worldview and actions are fundamentally incapable of enabling that, leaving her isolated and bitter, doomed to pander to the lowest common denominator. Layne's only option here is to blame everyone else for a perceived, obviously fascist-coded moral degradation in modern art, as opposed to thinking for 2 seconds that maybe, just maybe, time is a thing that exists and stuff is actually good, just different now. Also, everybody thinks everyone else's reviews are dog shit anyways. Like, that's why there's an entire industry built around review dunking stuff. It's ridiculous. Like, come on, Layne, if you're gonna invent hyperbole about stuff, at least be realistic about it. It's ruining my immersion. Okay, interlude over. Time to see how Layne botches another study again. Goodbye. Day 38 of recording. This spoon has turned into my only friend. My second friend.
Lord, send the flood.
So a study that got a well-deserved bit of traction a bit ago called They Can't Read Very Well, a study on the reading comprehension skills of English majors at 2 Midwestern universities, is Layne's next victim. It released its result in 2024, important to mention because the research was performed in 2015, examining how collegiate-level English majors are able to translate the opening of Charles Dickens' Bleak House. Straight up, the study does identify some serious difficulties even amongst English majors. But, class, once again, you're good at this now. Layne's interpretation exceeds both the author's claims and the methodological scope of the research.
That I want to make sure you understand is that as alarming as this is, it's exactly critical literacy. These readers were instructed to translate Dickens' prose into exact modern words, but instead of doing that, they made general comments about what they thought of the text. All of this, these bad reading tactics, as I'm sure you remember, are the direct result of training kids in critical literacy. In reality, these students are performing exactly as trained. They're following the precise instructions they received when they were learning to read.
You know the drill. There's nothing in here about phonics, decoding, critical literacy, whatever, basically anything she says at this point. You know. The study is neat though, because it examines how a group of college students performed on a single demanding literary task using a think aloud comprehension protocol designed to observe meaning-making strategies rather than basic reading ability. That means some science guys had the students talk about their process for what they did to understand the hard words. When Layne speaks of issues presented by the study, she says, these bad reading tactics, as I'm sure you remember, are the direct result of training kids in critical literacy. It's almost comforting to see her endlessly come back to the same imaginary cause not referenced at all by the research she's claiming to have read, which she effortlessly lies about. My brain is dying. Anyways, let's look at the study for real because it's actually quite interesting. You see, the research asked 85 English majors at 2 Midwestern universities to read the famously dense opening of Bleak House by Charles Dickens and translate it into modern English. The authors emphasized that their goal with this study was to observe how much complex information students could extract from the passage, not whether they could decode words or read fluently. Layne says as to their results, what they found was 58% of the study's participants were at about a level 1 literacy or slightly higher. Now, the astute viewer or subscriber will notice that Layne is pulling from the PIAAC levels that she lied to us about earlier. However, important to note that the researchers do not use PIAAC standards because they literally cannot be used to judge the result of this study. Layne is very cleverly using the previous seeds of panic she sowed in the minds of her viewers to make you think that 58% of college students have kindergarten literacy. Very, very sneaky. What our authors actually report is that 58%, which is 49 out of 85 of the subjects, understood so little of the introduction to Bleak House that they would not be able to read the novel on their own. One of these study's clearest conclusions is that these struggling students lack strategic reading behaviors, and nothing could even be remotely tied back to critical literacy as the cause of this. The authors repeatedly emphasized that problematic readers did not slow down, reread, or repair misunderstandings. As they wrote, none of the problematic readers showed any evidence that they could read recursively or fix previous errors in comprehension. By contrast, the small group of proficient readers, about 5% or so, demonstrated the opposite behavior. These readers immediately recognized when they were lost and were able to turn back and use successful tactics. The authors note that many struggling students were comfortable with their confusion, defining reading as skimming and relying on summaries rather than close engagement. Most of the problematic readers define reading Bleak House as skimming the text and relying on spark notes. These are learned habits and pedagogical failures, not evidence of degenerative or irreversible literacy decline because no phonics or critical literacy. Things that critical literacy does, the strategies that it promotes, could actually help these kids in learning how to read better. The authors explicitly note that Bleak House was chosen because literary prose of this kind is exceptionally demanding, requiring readers to interpret unfamiliar diction, extended metaphor, and 19th century syntactic structures, which can be crazy sometimes. Like, I've been reading Frankenstein, and damn, bro, Mary Shelley was on some shit. That shit rules. Difficulty with Dickens in this instance reflects the demands of disciplinary literacy, which is the specialized practices required to read historically distant literatures that I mentioned before that Layne never brought up, not an inability to read in any general sense. And the tactics that they are lacking are not because of critical literacy. Curiously, comprehension actually increases the older students are, showing that this is fixable with practice and time. In other words, these students were not unable to read. They were average readers struggling with an unusually complex, historically distant literary task, lacking in the methods to conquer it. When used responsibly, this study presents a very defensible conclusion that even advanced students struggle with syntactically dense, historically distant text because they lack practice in some slow, strategic, and recursive reading skills in order to conquer stuff like this. To quote the study, less attention has been paid to the literary skills of college students who are not defined as developmental readers, which is absolutely worth examining how teachers support and enable reading at higher levels. However, Layne's saying that these bad reading tactics, as I'm sure you remember, are the direct result of training kids in critical literacy is neither accurate nor even remotely defensible to somebody who actually possesses the reading comprehension abilities and basic historical context to actually understand this study. And speaking of not even remotely defensible, whoa, surprise, there's one more old guy we gotta talk about. Whoa, woo, please contain your excitement. See, when I saw Layne bring up John Dewey, that was the point in my perusal of her work that I knew that her ass must have been used as the Mary Poppins bag, because the incomprehensible amount of shit she was pulling out of it is only possible if that was the case. As a certified John Dewey stan who has read all of his shit, I got a whole ass video about him, dog. This is when it became personal to me, okay? So, we've corrected Freyr and Shore, and now it's time to correct the last boogeyman that Layne has made, a philosopher and educator that has been hugely influential in my personal life and ethos, John Dewey.
The absolute disease that is the American public education system was, like it or not, specifically engineered to produce adults who were just literate enough to work at factories, about the 1 or 2 level according to the PIAAC.
There she is with the PIAAC shit again. Unbelievable.
So looking at it that way, maybe the American education system as designed and developed by John Dewey and co. isn't actually in decline. It's functioning exactly as intended.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack from that paragraph, obviously, but before we go deeper on the big D, I need to point out that saying that Dewey worked with capitalists to produce illiterate adults to toss into factories is like saying that Hitler worked to free the Jews. I know she got this straight out of her goddamn book, again, because she says John Dewey, the guy who built the modern American education system, believed that education should be focused not on education, but on deliberate, calculated social formation, is straight out of the book.
Since the beginning of Western civilization, the school curriculum was centered around the development of academic skills, the intellectual faculties, and high literacy. Dewey wanted to change all that. Why? Because high literacy produced that abominable form of independent intelligence, which was basically, as Dewey believed, antisocial.
Shout out Western civilization, bro. Love a good dog whistle. This is how we reached the point where the American system was deliberately designed to produce the outcomes she now condemns. And for Layne and Iserbit, John Dewey stands at the center of this grand plan. And of course, the only source Layne has for this is the book. So what did Dewey, the great antisocial, child brainwashing capitalist dog, actually think, you ask? Well, incredibly easy. Just take everything Layne says and think the opposite. He consistently argued that education should serve democratic life, not industrial efficiency. In My Pedagogic Creed, he wrote, "Education is the fundamental method of social progress and reform." In Democracy and Education, Dewey explicitly rejected that education's purpose was to prepare students for predetermined social or economic roles, arguing instead the aim of education is to enable individuals to continue their education, or that the object and reward of learning is the continued capacity for growth. Also in Democracy and Education, he has an entire chapter called Vocational Aspects of Education, in which Dewey is explicitly hostile to the reduction of education to technical workforce training. Capitalists hated him because he criticized forms of vocational schooling that merely fit students into existing industrial orders rather than cultivating their own intelligence and adaptability to build careers and occupations for themselves. God, it's so easy to make a video like Layne's. She just lies and then she gets like 500,000 views. Like, fuck, I spent so long researching this. What am I even doing? Dewey also opposed rote memorization divorced from meaning, passive absorption of information, authoritarian classroom discipline, and vocational tracking imposed by economic elites. He opposed the reduction of education to rigid mechanical training. Also, Dewey and other progressive ideas were also diluted or reversed by administrators focused on efficiency rather than inquiry, as per this book, because they hated his gay woke ideas. Much of the confusion that Layne inherits from her collapsing all nuance into a black hole stems from her thinking that the unstructured methodologies she's being mad at are actually not Dewey's. They're from the work of a very scary sounding man called William Hurd Kilpatrick, a student of Dewey's, which historians have long noted, in which his work's interpretation has departed significantly from Dewey's philosophy. Maybe if he was in the DDD, she would have known that, but he's not, so we'll never find out. This divergence from Dewey's initial ideas is often referred to as the Kilpatrick deviation, which is a lot lamer than it sounds. In the struggle for American curriculum, Kilpatrick and his followers often minimized structured content knowledge and overemphasized student interest, flattening Dewey's nuanced epistemology into simplified slogans and ineffective free-form strategies, which became, as noted, directly contrary to Dewey's position. Dewey himself criticized such distortions in experience and education, warning against unstructured activity masquerading as progressive pedagogy. The greatest danger that attends progressive education is the idea that it is an easy way to follow, so easy that its course may be improvised, if not in an impromptu fashion, at least almost day to day or from week to week. I am not in favor of any ends or methods that simplify because the name progressive may be applied to them. Layne crushes Dewey and Kilpatrick into a single figure and manages to misrepresent both of them. Additionally, the crucial distinction between pedagogical progressives and administrative progressives has been completely erased on both Layne's and the book's account. Pedagogical progressives, who were Dewey, emphasized inquiry, democracy, and integrated knowledge, while the administratives emphasized efficiency, standardization, and managerial control. The distinction is well established in the historiography Tinkering Towards Utopia that business progressives often collaborated with business interests to promote tracking systems and vocational differentiation, which Dewey obviously opposed because fuck those billionaire assholes was like 75% of his philosophy. And some cool shit on art. Go watch my video. Layne constructs this illusion of a coordinated movement by collapsing, again, all nuance and conflating Dewey's philosophical writings that she doesn't even understand with administrative policies he has very openly criticized. Her claim that his educational system is functioning exactly as intended is not a historical conclusion, but a conspiratorial assumption backed by nothing but a single fringe source that treats complexity, failure, and inconsistency as proof of secret intent. Boy, it must be exhausting to live your life like this. With this new context, we can rightfully remove Dewey from the role of mastermind and frame him as where he should be, one of many people in a massive debate on educational reform. But hi there, it's me again. Wow, we're seeing so much of each other. It's time to talk about the state and racism real quick. So just to prime this upcoming section a little bit, I need to break down what Layne means by this.
I mean, I'm sure you already know, but schools don't get the government handout if they don't use the government-approved curriculum, and that includes a lot of private schools. I mention government-approved curriculum because the state-mandated education system we have now is a recent invention, and again, not really the focus of this video. It's worth noting, however, that in the early days, it was billionaire industrialists who bankrolled the entire concept of a federal education board. Previously, the idea that the state should have any control over the education of children was unimaginable.
The fun never stops. Y'all cuties need to know, Layne is talking about Rockefeller, that Rockefeller, and his General Education Board project in the 20th century because her book talks a lot about Rockefeller and his project in the early 20th century. I am deteriorating. Once again, this is something that she mentions in the article more specifically, but not the video. Maybe because it would come off weird, even though, let's be honest, the whole thing is really fucking weird anyways. Layne's concerns here are not framed from a point of legitimate concern around actual billionaire influence in education like Elon or Bill Gates or the fucking billionaire Linda McMahon, however the fuck you say her name, being the literal Secretary of Education and fucking with all of us. No. They are in the interest of believing that there is a mastermind pulling the strings with this magical narrative, which I have abundantly established is complete bullshit, because a mystery cabal of actors instead of actual real people we can see right now doing shit in front of our faces that we can literally see in the news makes for a way more compelling narrative than reality. And to be crystal clear, I do not like Rockefeller and his goons and their shitty billionaire philanthropy, okay? Despite any ways that it may have improved the dire conditions, admittedly, of the South at a rocky point in our nation's history, the South would have eventually done stuff without him. Rockefeller and his General Education Board project were a deeply racist and classist project and have had long-term impacts on how billionaire philanthropy has been enabled in the United States. This is a great article, by the way, on how all of it was mega racist and classist. It's like really bad. It's like really bad. As one of the board's leaders said, avoid social questions, leave politics alone, continue to be patient, live moral lives. Honestly, based on that quote, I would have assumed that Layne would have loved the Rockefeller stuff if, she actually understood what he was trying to do. Also, very funny, they, like everybody else, realized that they actually did very little in the grand scheme of things that actually affected people how they wanted, besides just kind of being racist assholes about stuff. Our most notable lack of success may have been our inability to effect any significant changes that would improve education on the secondary level. Go fucking figure. In summary, billionaires are bad, but not for any of the reasons that Layne should be talking about, because those don't fit into the magical puppet master conspiracy that she is so intent on endlessly pushing, despite it only being in a singular source that also talks about cybernetics and cyborgs and stuff. Like, don't worry, we're gonna talk about later. It's, oh my god. Okay, goodbye. We're almost there. You're doing so good. I'm so proud of you, class. We're gonna have a pizza party. Okie dokie. This is about something in her article, not her video, but I need to mention it because it is important. Frederick Taylor Gates is in her sources as one of the culprits of the problem. And also, wow, he's in the book. Who could have seen it coming? Old Gates was a philanthropic advisor to the John D. Rockefeller, who wrote the essay, The Country School of Tomorrow, in response to the dire conditions of rural education in the American South, that Layne and co. like to cite, saying that, quote, he calls for a nation of workers, not a nation of thinkers. Considering this was written in 1913, things were pretty fucking shit. Many rural schools consisted of one-room schoolhouses with untrained teachers, irregular attendance, severe underfunding problems, and very little actual institutional support. Pretty much what you would expect from the South at the turn of the century. And Gates' essay was focused on rural education reform in the context of extreme poverty, agricultural instability, public health crises, and infrastructural neglect. A part of the most commonly circulated passage reads, "We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science." It's long, so I'm not gonna read all of it. Pause to read it if you want, but as you probably noticed, this sounds pretty bad. It is patronizing. It reflects elite assumptions about rural life that 100 million billion% deserve real criticism. But when restored to its full context, it still sounds really bad. However, upon reading the essay and knowing the historical context, you understand what Gates was trying to do. Gates, firstly, was not outlining a national education policy or calling for intellectual suppression. He was critiquing the imposition of urban academic curricula onto impoverished communities whose immediate needs included agricultural sustainability, public health, and basic institutional stability. At this time, large parts of the rural South were absolutely devastated by extreme poverty and public health emergencies, including widespread hookworm infection, which severely impairs children's physical and cognitive development. Gates and Rockefeller's attempts at educational reforms were as much about addressing a public health and infrastructure crisis than about schooling. Layne's plan of saying that Gates was a national conspiracy is how we can tell she is reproducing this narrative from the book entirely uncritically, because the essay was never about a nation. It was about a targeted proposal addressing specific rural conditions, and treating it as a blueprint for a national intellectual suppression program requires stripping the text of its scope, audience, and historical constraints, which is something we have seen that Layne is just is absolutely goated at. Like, honestly, one of the greats. And just as important as what Gates proposed is what actually happened with what he proposed. Historians are often and rightfully critical of Gates' legacy in the books that I mentioned, but for reasons that are different from Layne's fringe conspiracy accounts. These people say that Gates did not successfully engineer compliance in people, but argue that his ideas often reinforced class stratification, narrowed rural students' futures, and underestimated local knowledge. Go figure, fucking elite imperialists are once again going against what the locals actually fucking know. Fuck Bill Gates for all his fucking Africa food shit. It's exactly the same shit as I've been saying this entire fucking time. Changing and imposing educational practices is complicated, uneven, and impossible to do on a large scale like this. In other words, Gates' influence, where it even managed to exist at all, was limited and frequently counterproductive, not omnipotent, which is the exact opposite of what Layne asserts. Also, all Gates shit was mega racist. I can't emphasize that enough. Back on Dewey for a second, her industrialist narrative also positions Gates and Dewey as ideological collaborators whose efforts combine to shape an obedient workforce which just collapses under even the most minimal scrutiny. They were from completely different reform traditions. Gates' work emerged from philanthropy-driven rural uplift and social efficiency thinking, whereas Dewey's work emerged from democratic philosophy and experiential learning. Dewey was a rabid critic of the corporatized, efficiency-driven schooling that fucking Gates tried to put onto the poor people of the South. I'm dying. The country school of tomorrow reflects earliest 20th century anxieties about rural poverty and inequality. It is not a blueprint for undermining national literacy. To treat Gates as an antecedent to modern literacy decline is historically untenable and illustrative of the broader methodological problems that Layne endlessly manages to bring up. Also, I ain't seeing shit anywhere about phonics. What a fucking shocker. Last one. Which is good because I'm pretty sure my fucking voice is leaving me. Okay, this one actually is kind of fun. You know that whole left brain, right brain, like logic, imagination, whatever, a bit of pseudoscience that isn't real and neurology just proved forever ago, right? Yeah, the final major error that Layne makes is invoking a study called Development of Neural Systems for Reading by a Bruce McCandless and colleagues, in which participants learned a made-up language using either phonics like instruction or whole word memorization. Then the science nerds scanned their brains with some neuroscience shit to see how the brain was working during each method to test its effectiveness. It's actually really interesting. Anyways, as to Layne's interpretation of the results,
They found that the phonics learners were able to recognize the words they had learned in the blink of an eye, with the brain making instant connections with neural activity focused primarily in the left hemisphere, that is, the side of the brain most involved in logic, analytical thinking, and language processing, among other things.
woof. And for whole language learners, she says
That their brain activity was focused far more primarily on the right side of the brain, the side most involved in art, feeling, creativity, and imagination.
you're smart enough now to know that this isn't what the study actually says. It says that when taught with phonics-like instruction, people showed more efficient and focal activation in left hemisphere regions associated with skilled reading, while whole word memorization produced less efficient, more diffuse activation patterns. These differences reflect learning efficiency, not emotional or imaginative processing, as the study explains. When people become good readers, their brains tend to use certain left side regions more efficiently for recognizing words, but those regions are not doing the job alone. Reading still depends on attention, language understanding, and other brain systems working together. The left side isn't a special logic module. It's just where skilled reading usually becomes more streamlined with practice. Nothing in this research describes whole language learners as emotional thinkers, nor does it associate diffuse activation with imagination or affect. But Layne explicitly states,
I hope Professor McCandless will forgive my making some generalizations here, but this study tells me that those who learn languages by some method other than phonics rely hugely on their feelings and, crucially, their imagination to determine and remember words and their meanings.
the good professor would not forgive you, Layne, because neuroimaging studies do not measure feelings or imagination. They measure patterns of neural activation, which neuroscientists, like my cool friend, interpret in terms of efficiency, specialization, and coordination across networks. Most theories concur that examining the relative strength of hemispheric contributions to reading relevant brain responses is more fruitful than merely ascribing processes to each hemisphere in isolation from the other. It's literally in the study, bro. They literally say it. They literally say the thing. They say it. They say it. She's trying to say it, but that's not it. In the thing, the right hemisphere reflects difficulty, not emotional thinking. Jesus fucking Christ. Phonics is just faster to learn words with. That's all. Fuck. Her summary, saying that something that seems overall consistent is that phonics trains the logical, critical thinking parts of the brain, while other methods tend to center on the emotional and imaginative part of the brain, is so far off base, it's not even in the stadium anymore. Also, not like I really need to do this, but Layne's argument depends on the left-right brain neuroscience thing that is just so repeatedly and endlessly wrong. Honestly, of all the things that I have to debunk in this video, this is probably the most embarrassing. The whole Dewey thing is also kind of embarrassing, but this is really bad. Well, here we are. Voice is gone. What a fucking doozy this has been, huh? That book of Layne sure does make for a real handy blueprint for a video essay these days. I particularly like the part where she doesn't tell the viewer at all about basically anything and frames all of this as her own thread of ideas. And let's be honest here, we all know that just putting it in her sources doesn't count because people uncritically believing these videos do not check the sources, just like the same people who believe her conspiracy book. Shout out to this Goodreads review I found of it that talks about the plandemic and how teachers' unions are why America is in bad shape. Primary source for Layne, by the way. Ah, well, since, you know, leaning into openly conspiratorial moralizing around legitimate problems while repackaging them in the least pragmatic but most rhetorically satisfying way possible is one of the main ways people make content these days, I'm sure that Iserbit would be quite happy that Layne's video stole her work for the greater good against those socialist fascists. But the worst part of all of this is there's so many poor saps who believe what she's saying because her core statements aren't wrong. She just is supporting them with the most incorrect information you can possibly have. And so many poor, afraid people do not know enough to fact check her. Moleman, to recap, her premise is based off of her own moralization and laziness. She doesn't understand how technology develops or works. Her primary source is a completely discredited conspiracy book. She lies or is too lazy to properly interpret multiple studies. She does lie about the works of Shore, Dewey, and Frere. She can't even be bothered to check the outdated left brain, right brain shit she's just pushing. She misleads people as to what goes in to be able to read at all, even though it's very, very complicated. And she lies about what whole language is, what critical literacy is, what generative themes are. Like the list is so long, dude. The list is so fucking long. The biggest thing I want people to take away from this is that Layne doesn't actually care. She doesn't care about literacy. She doesn't care about writing. She doesn't care about reading. She doesn't care about art. She doesn't care about capitalism or billionaires. She doesn't care about children or schools. She cares about herself and looking smarter and feeling right. That is what this video is for. Some of the final words in the DDD read, as per the afterword, a massive national effort to restore true local control of our public schools seemed to this writer to be the only real long-term solution which will guarantee freedom and upward mobility for all our children. Such a solution is no more difficult to implement than solutions being presently offered by those who wish to use America's youth for their own profit-seeking motives, resulting in the loss of economic and political freedom. Layne's belief that it's so easy and obvious to just fix a mountain of complex problems that we have with fucking phonics and homeschooling is mirrored exactly from the blinding ignorance I just read from the author of her stupid fucking book.
If you have kids and you can homeschool them, do. Once you start looking into just how bad the American education system is, you'll start to get pretty angry, probably. It's bad. However bad you think it is, it's worse.
There are so many things we could have actual critical discussions about involving educating our people, and even the idea of how schools could be seen as assembly lines into factories, which, by the way, Frere fucking criticized, thank you very much. This perspective is rooted in such a deep-seated selfishness and an inability to think about how other people live and move through the world, as is evidenced by her solution being to homeschool your kids and shut down public education. Like, it's actually fucking crazy how much she has made up over the course of this entire video to convince you the American education system is morally bad. Therefore, homeschooling is literally the only option for true independent thinkers who don't want their kids turned vegan or whatever. I'm literally a broken record at this point, but I just can't stop mentioning that Layne seems to go out of her way to not talk about the real issues, which are structural and economic inequalities, once again, the actual biggest issue for educational outcomes, and the encroaching digital hellscape that we live in that is rotting our mind once again, the billion, like, that is such a good billionaire tie, and the fact that she doesn't fucking do it actually blows my fucking mind. Look, my voice is gone. I'm tired and angry. I don't have much more to say on this. So before I talk about some fun little things in her conspiracy book that I didn't have the time or the place to get to in my main video as I talk over the Patreon scroll, I just want to say thank you for making it to the end of this monstrosity, and especially Hilary, if you are watching. First, please subscribe, because I think that would be very funny. But actually, if you're watching this, this is my core issue. This is not a literacy crisis video. This is an anti-public schooling video. This is a pro-homeschooling, anti-sex education, libertarian governmental conspiracy parents' rights ass video. This is a video that was made to take very real fears about a very real issue and weaponize them with ahistorical, unempirical, moralistic lies to get views on YouTube. Because you sound too stuck up to find something good to read, even though, again, you got fucking creepypastas on your book list. Like, what is going on, dude? What is actually going on? Anyways, to everybody else, thank you for watching this. I am exhausted, and I'm gonna read some cool stuff from the book now as I do the Patreon credits. If you don't care about that, goodbye. Please hit the good buttons. I got cool stuff going on in 2026 for the channel, including a second one. That's gonna be neat. But anyways, okay, Patreon scroll, goodbye. Yay, we're doing Patreon scroll. Man, this was a fucking doozy. Okay, there's a lot of like really funny shit that is in this book that's also like really bad and terrible. Like, for example, one of the things is that this book hates disabled kids. Like this book really hates disabled kids in general. Like, for example, they have Iserbit pulls a little section here in 1993 that talks about improving schooling stuff for disabled kids. And instead of actually reading the full proposition that she is complaining about that educators and Congress is trying to pass. She simply does not, and simply makes the assertion that basically they're trying to give the disabled kids their like instructional stuff to the non-disabled kids. Like she's convinced that they're trying to not equalize or create some level of consistency between disabled and non-disabled kids to, I don't know, give the disabled kids a better quality of life, but instead drag the non-disabled kids down. Because fuck the disabled, right? Fuck the disabled. Let's see. There's also, oh, okay. This is fucking awesome. Did you know cybernetics was like a thing they were worried about the communists doing? Because I didn't, and I learned that in here, and then that's fucking awesome. She's specifically talking about this book called Mental Robots, which like I'll like link to or find something or whatever. But it's basically about how the communists are using psychology and in what they call like cybernetics to like treat people as machines and reprogram that way. Like this is a fucking awesome passage here. But since a human being to a communist is simply another machine, since human nerve centers have exactly the same function as an electronic circuit, since a human has not a soul, he is only a mechanical apparatus, the communists have decided that this particular science has a very useful application, not on machines, but on humans. Bro, this shit's fire, dog. Like, holy fuck. What were these people on? This is awesome. And that goes nicely into something I didn't really have a nice way of going on about. But, like, part of the whole, like, emotional reprogramming, conditioning shit, whatever, like, so much of this is rooted in fear-mongering about Skinner and Pavlov, you know, the dog bell guy Pavlov, and then the box guy Skinner. These people were so convinced that they were taking these tests in behavioral psychology and trying to use them to brainwash America's youth. Like Skinner's mentioned all over the fucking book, as is Pavlov. 53 mentions of Pavlov, 349 of Skinner in this goddamn book. Like it is so goofy, man. It is so fucking goofy. Also, one last thing, so it doesn't go too long, is, you know, like the whole like absolutism of moral values that you may have picked up on in the video. Obviously, that's religious in nature. Like there isn't anything else it could be, which is why there are multiple sections like this one which complain about the removal of Christian values being not taught in school, a separation of religiousness and school teachings, which Iserbit and other people were not happy about, because she was part of the Reagan administration. Had I mentioned that? Yeah, she like worked for fucking Reagan. Absolutely fucking crazy. Like this passage here, in regards to a book that she really didn't like talking about, this division, says, if anyone out there believes a book published by the Association for Supervision and Curriculum Development, a spin-off of the National Education, which consistently issues tirades about Christians who believe in sound moral values, see, there it is, could come up with anything, the purpose of which is not to further the inroads into destruction, italics, of whatever absolutist values our children still have, then I suggest they have been living under a rock ever since the 1940s, when the drive to eliminate absolutist moral values from schools started. So religion is cool in schools. I wonder if Layne has a problem with religion in schools. Probably not, because, you know, the whole like parents' rights no sex education thing, banana, whatever, feels very religious coded. But again, I have no proof. She also gives like weird atheist vibes, which is like a fascinating contradiction for her to hold. Anyways, that's all I feel like talking about for now. I'm so tired. I don't know how long I've been sitting here, but there's no light coming in from my windows, and the light has also left my eyes. So I'm going to go now. Thank you for watching. Cool things are happening this year. I don't know how long this is going to take to edit, but yeah, I will never make a video like this again. Okay, goodbye.